my dear child, come a little closer, and let me tell you a story that begins the way all curious nights do. With a quiet street, a sleepy moon, and a girl who carried more secrets in her heart than she ever showed on her face, there was a café that only opened when the clock slipped past midnight, a tiny place resting between shadows and soft lantern lights, where the windows glowed like a hug and the air always smelled of warm cinnamon and old stories waiting to be remembered. And it is there, in that gentle corner of the world, that Raina, a tender soul with weary courage, first stepped in searching for nothing more than a moment of peace, not knowing that the night had already begun weaving strange threads around her. Some stories crawl quietly, my love, soft as a whisper, and some rise like steam from a warm mug, carrying shapes and messages, if only one looks closely enough. So settle down, breathe slow, and let this tale unfold like dawn across the sky. For every moment Raina lived inside that midnight café brought her one step closer to truths she had never dared to touch, and one step closer to the stranger who would change her life forever. The night began with a hush that felt like someone had gently placed a soft blanket over the whole town, and Raina found herself walking down the narrow lane behind her apartment with her collar pulled close against the cool air. A soft breeze brushed her cheek as if guiding her somewhere she had not planned to go. She had spent the entire evening staring at a blank page on her laptop, the little blinking cursor mocking her silence. So she slipped outside for air, hoping movement would shake something loose. Her boots tapped lightly over the old stones, and with every step she felt as though the night was nudging her forward, almost whispering that something waited ahead. Halfway down the lane, she stopped, because she saw a warm flicker of golden light where there had never been anything before. It looked like a tiny cafe nestled between two shuttered shops, as if it had quietly arrived just for her. The sign above the door swayed gently and read "Midnight Brew" in faded paint. She felt her heart flutter with curiosity and a small shiver of wonder inside. The bell above the door chimed a silver-sweet note, and a wave of warmth welcomed her in. The air smelled of fresh coffee with a hint of cinnamon and something older, something like stories kept in wooden boxes. An old man stood behind the counter, his eyes kind and patient, the sort of eyes that looked as though they had listened to many tired hearts. Raina hesitated, brushing her hair back behind her ear. She felt strangely shy, yet drawn in, as if she had stepped into a place that already knew her name. The old man smiled slowly and motioned for her to sit, his movements gentle, like someone who had lived long enough to never rush anything. "You look like someone standing at a crossroads," he said, his voice warm and steady. She blinked at him, wondering how he could possibly guess the truth she had not spoken aloud. She had been struggling for months, wrestling with her writing, her future. The ache of loneliness she rarely admitted, even to herself, as she settled into a soft chair. By the window, she watched the way the light glowed around the room. Everything felt safe, familiar. Yet she could not shake the faint tremor in her chest, a feeling that something hidden lay beneath all this warmth. She wrapped her hands around the mug he placed before her, the steam rising in soft curls. The first sip of coffee felt like a sigh she had been holding for years. Her thoughts drifted as she looked outside. The street was still and empty, too quiet for a Thursday night. She wondered how a whole cafe could exist here without anyone noticing. and why she had never seen it before. The old man leaned his elbows on the counter and watched her with a knowing calm, as though he understood questions she had not yet spoken. "This place comes only on Thursdays," he said, stirring something in a small copper pot, "and only for those who are meant to find it." His words settled gently in the air, yet carried a mystery that stirred something deep inside her. She felt a soft pull in her chest, the type that comes when life is about to change. Rainia glanced around once more, feeling both comforted and slightly breathless, as if she were sitting at the edge of a story waiting to open. The golden light shimmered against the window pane, and far off the wind hummed a faint tune, guiding her toward whatever lay ahead. The door of the midnight café opened with a soft wooden sigh, and a little gust of night air slipped in as if carrying someone carefully inside. Rainia felt the warmth around her shift just a bit, like the room was taking a quiet breath, and when she looked up she saw him, a man with tired eyes that held storms and secrets all at once. He walked with steady, careful steps, not slow, yet not hurried, as if he had learned to move through the world without disturbing anything he did not have to. His coat was worn along the sleeves, his hair slightly tousled, as though the wind had whispered too many stories into it. He went straight to the counter and said in a low, calm voice that he would have his usual black coffee. Rainia watched him the way one watches a candle flame, curious and a little mesmerized. She had never seen him before, yet he behaved as though he belonged here, as though the café rose from the earth on Thursdays just to make room for him. He sat at the table next to hers, placing his hands around the warm cup as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored. The old man behind the counter gave the stranger a nod, the nod of someone who had known him far longer than a single night. Rania felt a soft pull of wonder in her stomach. She glanced down at her own cup, the steam rising in thin ribbons, and she tried not to stare, but her eyes kept wandering back to him. When he finally looked up, his gaze met hers with a quiet steadiness that made her breath falter, not out of fear, but something gentler, something like recognition. "You are Rainia," he said, his voice soft and sure. She blinked in surprise because she had not introduced herself. Her heart gave a small tremble. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and whispered, "How do you know my name?" And the stranger gave a faint, tired smile, the kind that held a whole lifetime behind it. "I have read your books," he murmured. Every one of them, a warm mixture of pride and unease, stirred inside her. She often wondered who read her late-night scribbles and lonely paragraphs. But hearing it from this quiet man with weary eyes felt different. It felt personal, almost intimate, yet unsettling in a way she could not name. The cafe light rested gently on his face, softening the sharp angles of his features. Rania felt her thoughts flutter, like pages caught in a breeze. How could he have found all her books? She had only published a few, and none were widely known. "You write like someone who has lived many lives," he said, sipping his coffee, his fingers tapping the cup lightly. "You write about people before they even know themselves." Her breath grew shallow for a moment, because those were words she had written privately in her journal, words she had never shown anyone. She wondered if he was guessing, or if he truly knew something she did not understand. The old man behind the counter kept polishing a silver spoon, his eyes shifting between them with a calm that felt almost watchful. The stranger looked at her again, and his gaze softened. You are standing at a turning point, he said gently, and your stories know it even before you do. She felt the warmth of the café wrap around her like a comforting shawl. Yet a small shiver curled along her spine. Outside, the night deepened into a soft velvet blue, the windows glowing faintly like lanterns guiding travelers home. And Rania felt as though she were drifting into a dream she had stepped into long before she ever arrived here. The spoon slipped from Rania's fingers and tapped against the cup with a tiny silver chime. The sound rang through the quiet cafe like a secret being gently announced. And as she reached out to steady the cup, she noticed a faint brown mark blooming on the table beneath it, shaped so strangely that it made her pause. It was not round like most stains. No, it curved like a little wave with a sharp edge, almost like the hook of an argument caught mid-air. She frowned softly and traced it with the tip of her finger. Warm from the coffee, a tiny shiver ran up her arm. Something about that shape felt too specific, too pointed, as if it were trying to say something. The old man behind the counter glanced her way with a patient calm. He kept stirring something in a small brass pot that filled the air with a deep roasted smell. She wanted to ask him about the stain, but hesitated, unsure if it was silly or if he would look at her with those all-knowing eyes and give an answer she was not ready to hear. When she stepped outside later that night, the air was cool and carried that quiet hum she had begun to recognize as the café's silent farewell. She walked home with her thoughts tangled like threads, and she tried to forget the strange shape on the table, telling herself it was nothing. But the next evening, she found herself in the middle of a sharp argument with her neighbor. A silly thing about parking and noise. Yet the moment their voices rose, she felt a cold pinch in her stomach. The shape of the stain flashed in her mind, the same curve, the same sharpness, and it left her breathless for a moment. She tried to tell herself it was coincidence. Life was full of funny little echoes. But when Thursday returned, she found her steps drifting back to the midnight cafe as though the night itself was guiding her gently by the elbow. The bell chimed its soft tune when she entered, and the warm glow wrapped around her like a familiar shawl. This time, she watched her cup more closely. The steam rose in soft curls, and the rich scent of coffee warmed her cheeks. When she lifted the cup, a new stain appeared, shaped like a small, crooked line, almost like a bent telephone receiver. She stared at it, her heart tapping lightly against her ribs. She whispered to the old man, "Do your cups usually do this?" And he gave her a slow, thoughtful smile. "They show what is already on the way," he said gently, as if explaining the weather. She swallowed, unsure whether to believe him or to laugh nervously and brush it aside. That night, her phone rang just as she drifted toward sleep, an unknown number glowing on the screen. Her breath caught, and when she answered, she heard a voice she had not heard in years. It felt like the past, leaning close to whisper in her ear. The next Thursday, she returned once more, drawn by something she could not name. And as she lifted her cup again, another mark appeared. This one softer, shaped like a small, fading swirl. It reminded her of an old memory, the kind that rises like a forgotten fragrance from a dusty drawer. And a wave of emotion washed through her chest. Her thoughts curled around the moments she had buried long ago, and she felt the gentle ache of them sitting quietly inside her. Waiting to be understood, the stranger with tired eyes was seated nearby. Watching her with that calm gaze that felt both comforting and unsettling, Raina looked down at the swirl again. The cafe lights glimmered faintly over the polished table, and she felt as though the night itself was turning a page for her, guiding her toward whatever memory was about to return. The morning arrived with a soft rustle of paper sliding under Rania's door. The thin envelope scraped lightly against the floor like a timid knock, and the sound made her pause halfway through tying her hair. Her fingers stilled as though the air itself had asked her to listen. She walked toward the door with slow, careful steps, the wooden boards warm beneath her feet. And when she bent to pick up the envelope, she felt a ripple of unease bloom beneath her ribs. The handwriting on the front was familiar in a way that made her breath turn fragile. It was the handwriting she once knew by heart. The name of her ex-husband sat on the corner of the envelope like a quiet ghost. Her hands trembled before she even opened it. The paper felt softer than she remembered, worn at the edges, as if someone had held it too long. She slid her thumb under the flap and unfolded the letter gently, afraid it might crumble. His words were simple, almost painfully so. He wanted to meet. He wrote that there were things she needed to know, things he had never had the courage to explain. She read the lines twice, then a third time, each word pressing against her chest with an old, familiar heaviness. She had left him because of a betrayal that had shattered something inside her, and the wound had never quite closed. All day her thoughts moved like slow tides, rising and falling. She tried to write, but the letters blurred before her eyes. Memories returned in soft ripples, the late-night whispers, the laughter in small kitchens, the silence that grew too heavy to carry. She kept telling herself she had healed, yet the letter brought back the ache of things unfinished. When night came, she found her steps drifting back to the midnight cafe, searching for the warm glow and quiet comfort it always offered. The bell above the door chimed its gentle note, and the scent of roasted coffee wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. She breathed it in deeply, hoping it would steady her. The old man looked up from his counter, his eyes soft with understanding before she even spoke. She sat at her usual seat, her hands still trembling faintly. When he placed the warm cup before her, the steam curled upward like small wandering spirits. She lifted the cup slowly, watching the shadows flicker across its surface. When she set it down again, she felt her breath catch. The stain blooming beneath it was shaped like a ring, not whole but cracked at one side, a broken circle with a tiny gap that made her chest tighten. She stared at it, her fingers curling gently around the edges of the table. "It is not always an ending," the old man murmured, polishing a brass spoon with slow, steady strokes. "Sometimes it is a beginning wearing an old face." His voice was gentle, but carried a weight that made her heart flutter with confusion and hope and fear all at once. She thought of her ex-husband's letter, of the betrayal she had carried like a heavy stone. She wondered if meeting him would shatter her again or finally free her. The stranger with tired eyes sat across the room, his gaze resting on her with a quiet watchfulness, as though he already knew the road she stood upon. Raina traced the broken ring with her fingertip. The warm light of the cafe shimmered softly on the table, and she felt the night settle around her like a tender whisper, nudging her gently toward whatever truth was waiting to be found next. A thin hush settled over the midnight cafe as the wind brushed against the windows, making them tremble with a gentle tapping sound. Rainia looked up from her untouched cup, and in the dim golden glow, she noticed the quiet stranger standing by the window, his silhouette outlined softly like a shadow that was thinking. He stood so still that the air around him seemed to hold its breath, one hand resting lightly on the window frame, his tired eyes watching the street with a calm that felt too deep for the moment, as if he were listening to something far beyond the night. The faint scent of roasted coffee drifted toward him and softened the edges of his shadow. Rainia felt drawn to him, pulled by a quiet curiosity she could not resist. She rose from her chair, her steps slow and careful. The wooden floor creaked gently beneath her feet. She wrapped her fingers around her warm cup, as if gathering courage from the heat. Her voice barely a whisper when she asked if he was all right. He turned toward her with that same steady calm, and the soft light revealed the worn tiredness in his expression, the kind that comes from carrying too many unspoken truths. "You have received a letter," he said gently, his voice low and warm like an old tune. Her breath caught because he said it as if he had been standing beside her door that morning. She nodded without meaning to. The memory of the letter stirred inside her like a small ache. She waited for him to say more, but for a moment he only looked at her, as though searching for something in her face, something she herself had not yet understood. The café felt unusually quiet. Even the old man behind the counter had paused his work. Then the stranger spoke again, his words slow and heavy with meaning. "If you open old doors, be ready for what walks through." The sentence settled in the air like a soft, dark feather, and Rainia felt her heart give a trembling flutter. She wanted to ask him what he meant, ask why he seemed to know so much, ask what he was warning her about. But before the questions could reach her lips, he stepped away from the window, moving with that calm, quiet grace of someone used to disappearing. The golden light brushed his coat as he walked toward the door, and for a brief moment she thought he might turn back and explain. He did not. The bell above the door chimed a single gentle note as he left. The night breeze slipped inside with him and carried away his warm, familiar presence. Rainia stood frozen by the window, her fingers tightening around her cup as the café's silence folded around her, a silence that felt full of unspoken things. Her thoughts stirred like leaves in a soft wind. She wondered why he cared, why he knew, and why his warning felt like it came from someone who had seen too many doors open and too many shadows walk through them. Part of her wanted to follow him out into the night, but another part held her still, whispering that answers would come in their own time. She turned back toward her table, the golden glow settling warm against her skin, and she felt the faint pull of the night urging her inward, urging her toward the next step she already sensed she would have to take. Outside the windows, the darkness shimmered gently, as though something unseen had passed by, leaving behind only a soft echo of mystery that beckoned her onward. Rain rattled against the rooftops like tiny, impatient fingers, and Rainia's coat clung damply to her shoulders as she hurried through the slick streets, the scent of wet earth and rain-soaked leaves curling around her. She clutched the envelope from her ex tightly in her hand, the paper crumpled slightly between her fingers. The café's golden light glimmered faintly ahead, warm and inviting against the gray drizzle, and she pushed open the door, stepping inside with a soft sigh. The bell above tinkled gently, and she shook the rain from her hair. letting the comfort of familiar warmth settle slowly into her bones. He was there, standing near the counter, his coat dripping slightly onto the wooden floor, his eyes lifting toward her with that quiet intensity she had once known too well. "Rainia," he said softly, voice low and trembling just enough to betray the distance the years had built between them. She nodded, her throat tight. They sat opposite each other, the small table between them like a fragile bridge. The old man behind the counter gave a small knowing nod and returned to polishing a spoon. Rania's fingers circled the warm mug in front of her, feeling its heat seep into her hands. She tried to steady her breathing. "I never betrayed you," he began, the words catching slightly. "Someone framed me, and it ruined us both." She stared at him, her mind spinning, memories flickering like shadows in the candlelight, the nights of silence, the cold absence he left, the whispers of betrayal that had broken her heart. He reached out tentatively, not touching her, but the gesture felt like a plea. "I came to tell you the truth, and I hoped you could forgive me." His eyes searched hers for something she could not yet name. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the weight lift, but a faint unease crept under her ribs. Rania's thoughts swirled in gentle spirals. She remembered the nights she had cried alone, the doubts that had wrapped themselves tightly around her heart. She wondered if forgiveness was something she even had to give, or if it was something she had to find inside herself first. She wanted to trust him, but the soft flicker of caution in her chest would not let her. The rain tapped steadily against the window, a rhythmic lullaby that both soothed and reminded her of the storm inside. The café smelled faintly of coffee and wet wood, a comforting reminder of warmth and safety. Even as old wounds stirred, she sipped her coffee slowly, savoring the bitter taste that seemed to anchor her. "I want to believe you," she whispered. Finally, almost to herself. "But something feels off." He nodded, not offended, understanding the delicate space between them. "I know," he said softly. "I cannot ask for trust, only honesty." A quiet truce settled over the table, fragile but alive. The lights of the café glimmered softly through the rain-streaked windows, the storm outside a gentle roar against the quiet warmth within, and Rainia felt herself suspended between past and present, the memory of betrayal pressing lightly against the hope of understanding, and she knew the night would carry her toward an answer she could not yet see. The midnight café smelled of warm coffee and old wood, the soft hum of the heater mingling with the faint creak of floorboards as Rainia stepped inside, her coat still damp from the drizzle outside. A gentle hush seemed to settle over the room, wrapping her like a familiar blanket. She walked toward her usual seat by the window, but something on the chair caught her eye. A small notebook lay there, bound in worn leather with faint scratches along the cover, and her name was written in delicate, looping letters on the front. She picked it up slowly, her fingers brushing the edges as though touching a secret. The old man behind the counter glanced at her with a quiet smile, returning to his work with practiced calm. Rainia opened the notebook with a soft exhale. The pages smelled faintly of ink and something older, something like rain on stone. And she began to read. The first entries described moments she remembered clearly. Yesterday's coffee stain shaped like a crooked phone receiver, the argument that had followed, the letter from her ex. Yet, as she turned the pages, she realized some entries described things that had not happened yet. Small events, almost ordinary, but precise enough to to make her stomach tighten. Her eyes froze on one line, written in careful handwriting, almost a whisper on the page: "The stranger will save you." And a shiver ran along her spine. Her fingers tightened on the notebook. The warmth of her coffee cup in front of her felt suddenly grounding, yet it did little to calm the fluttering of her heart. Rania's thoughts swirled like wind caught in the corners of her mind. She wondered who could have written such detailed entries. How could someone predict events that hadn't even occurred? And why did it seem to know about the stranger she had begun to trust so quietly? The idea was thrilling and terrifying all at once. She whispered softly, almost to the notebook itself. "Who are you, and why do you know me?" The words felt strange, gentle in the quiet hum of the café. The old man watched her with a calm understanding, his eyes resting for a moment on the notebook, as though it had always been part of the room. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows, a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the night. The steam from her coffee curled upward, smelling faintly of roasted beans and cinnamon, wrapping around her senses and lending a strange comfort, even as unease crept through her. Rania traced the line again: "The stranger will save you," and felt a tangle of hope and caution. She wondered if she was meant to trust him, if the notebook was a warning or a promise, and a quiet determination settled inside her, soft yet firm. The flickering golden light of the café cast shadows across the table, and she felt the night stretch gently around her like a protective hush. The notebook open and alive in front of her, and somewhere beyond the windows, the whisper of destiny seemed to drift closer, guiding her toward the path she could not yet see. The wind outside whipped through the narrow streets, rattling shutters and sending a chill that seeped through Rania's coat. She clutched her scarf tighter around her neck as she walked, the familiar golden glow of the midnight café flickering ahead like a beacon, and something in her chest felt taut, uneasy. She entered the café and let the door close behind her with a soft chime. The warm air carried the rich scent of roasted coffee and polished wood, but the comfort she usually felt here was slightly off, like the room itself held its breath. She noticed her ex sitting at the corner table, his coat discarded, eyes sharper than she remembered, scanning the room with a subtle intensity. Rania's fingers trembled lightly as she set her cup down, the steam rising in thin curls. She kept her gaze on him, her mind suddenly racing through the weeks since the letter, the meeting, the careful steps that had led her here, and slowly, a gnawing realization began to settle in. Each moment had been orchestrated, calculated, not a single chance encounter. "I thought you wanted to see the truth," he said, voice low, almost pleading, yet something in the edge of it made her flinch. She noticed the tension in his hands, the restless way he tapped a finger against the table, the sharp watchfulness in his gaze, as if he was measuring her reactions. She felt her pulse quicken, the warmth of the coffee no longer comforting. Rania's thoughts twisted quietly. She remembered the trust she had tried to offer him, the hope she had allowed herself to feel, but now everything felt fragile, tainted, like glass balanced on a ledge. She whispered under her breath, "This isn't him. Not the man I knew." Her heart ached with a blend of fear and sorrow. The stranger with tired eyes appeared near the door, unnoticed at first, his calm presence contrasting sharply with the tension across the room. Rania's gaze flicked to him, and she felt a small spark of hope, someone who had always been steady, quiet, and perhaps, just perhaps, her anchor in this storm. Her ex leaned forward slightly, voice urgent. I needed you to come back. I couldn't let you walk away. The words sounded desperate, fragile, in a way that made her stomach clench. She realized he was unstable, his careful planning now revealing a side she had never seen before. The safety she had once felt around him had dissolved like mist. Outside, rain began tapping lightly against the windows again, a soft rhythm that both soothed and reminded her of the storm she had stepped into. The café smelled of coffee and damp earth, and Raina sipped slowly, letting the warmth seep into her hands and arms, anchoring her. Her thoughts circled quietly. She understood now that the past could not be trusted, that the man she had loved and the man sitting across the table were not the same. Yet, she also sensed the choice before her, to act with caution, to observe, to let the moment unfold carefully. The golden lights of the café flickered softly against the polished wood, and Raina felt the night settle around her like a protective cloak, the quiet anticipation of what might come next, resting gently in the air. And somewhere in the shadows, the promise of clarity seemed just within reach. Rain-slicked streets glimmered like scattered jewels as Raina stepped carefully toward the café. The night air, thick with the scent of wet stone and coffee from nearby shops. Her coat clung damply to her shoulders, and the soft tap of her boots echoed faintly against the empty lane. Inside, the warm golden glow of the café felt like a soft sigh, wrapping around her with its familiar comfort. But her chest was tight, a low tension humming through her. The ex she had just confronted sat at the corner table, eyes restless and sharp, hands twitching as if ready to leap. Suddenly, the quiet man with tired eyes appeared beside her, his presence calm but commanding, and she felt a small jolt of relief. Raina, you need to trust me, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and a gentle certainty that settled over her. She nodded, unsure, yet drawn to the quiet strength in him. He leaned close, whispering in a low calm, I'm an undercover investigator. I've been tracking him for months. This cafe is safe for moments like this. The words made her stomach flutter, the air between them thick with tension and relief. He gestured subtly toward the exit, the ex rising with a sudden sharpness, a threat in his movements. Rania's heart pounded as the quiet man guided her behind the counter, his hands steady on her shoulders. The warmth of his presence, a soft anchor in the storm of adrenaline rushing through her. The ex's voice cut through the air, but before he could approach, the investigator pulled her swiftly toward the back door, the familiar hum of the cafe. Fading behind them, her thoughts raced, a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. She had almost walked back into danger, almost trusted a man who was no longer safe. Yet now, in the calm control of the stranger, she felt a fragile sense of protection she had not realized she craved. Why me? She whispered, voice trembling. And he gave a small half-smile. Because you needed someone watching, someone steady. The rain splashed around them as they moved, droplets hitting their coats and hair. The night smelled of wet leaves and concrete, and Raina felt the world sharpen around her senses. The fear mingled with the strange comfort of being guided, of being seen and protected. She glanced back briefly, the golden light of the cafe shimmering behind the wet glass, and she felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. a quiet awe settling in her chest as she realized the stranger had been silently protecting her, always just beyond the edge of her vision. Her fingers brushed against the warmth of his coat as they paused beneath a flickering street lamp, the rain falling in gentle streaks around them, the night stretching quietly, holding a soft promise, and Rania knew, for the first time since the storm had begun, that she could breathe, that she could trust herself to move forward. The distant glow of the café faded into the rain-soaked dark, and she felt the gentle pull of safety and quiet hope as they stepped further into the night, the memory of golden light lingering softly, hinting at the mysteries that still awaited. The first light of dawn slipped gently over the rooftops, casting a pale gold across the wet streets, and Rania's coat felt softer against her skin as she approached the midnight cafe one last time, the faint hum of the city waking round her, blending with the gentle drip of rain from the eaves. Inside, the familiar warmth wrapped around her like a soft blanket, the smell of roasted coffee and polished wood, comforting and alive. The old owner stood behind the counter, his eyes calm and bright, and he gave her a small nod as she entered, the bell above the door chiming a gentle, welcoming note. Rania took her usual seat by the window, her fingers curling around the warm mug, the steam rising in soft swirls that seemed to whisper against the morning light. The cafe felt quieter than ever, yet alive with a sense of ending and promise. The chairs and tables seemed to breathe a gentle farewell. The old owner approached slowly, polishing a brass spoon as he spoke. "You chose the right path." His voice was soft but firm. Carrying the weight of quiet wisdom, Rania felt her chest loosen, a small smile tugging at her lips. She had faced the past, navigated the shadows, and somehow found the courage to step into her own life again. Her thoughts drifted gently. Memories of the ex, the notebook, the stranger with tired eyes, all mingling with the quiet comfort of the cafe. She felt the warmth of survival and the subtle thrill of new beginnings. The fear that had clutched her heart now felt like a shadow fading behind the golden light. She whispered to herself, "I can finally breathe outside." The streets glimmered with the soft shine of dew and the fading drizzle, the scent of wet earth and warm coffee lingering in the air. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth fill her hands, her thoughts circling the stranger who had quietly guided her, a gentle curiosity curling in her chest. Maybe she could let herself wonder about him now. The old man placed a small plate of biscuits in front of her, the aroma of fresh butter and sugar mingling with the coffee. He gave a small smile. "Every ending is a beginning too," she nodded, feeling a soft clarity settle over her. The night's chaos folding gently into this quiet morning. Rania lingered by the window a moment longer, watching the sun rise in soft streaks of pink and gold, the city stretching awake around her. She felt the comfort of the cafe, the lessons it had given, and the gentle courage it had nurtured in. Her heart, with her coffee in hand, she stepped outside into the pale morning, the warmth still radiating through her fingers. She breathed in the fresh dawn air, feeling ready for whatever life had in store. The memory of the golden cafe lights lingered softly, a gentle glow behind her as she moved forward, and somewhere in the quiet corners of the waking city, she felt a whisper of curiosity, a promise that some mysteries were not yet finished. Yet, for the first time, she felt ready to live her story fully, letting the night and its secrets fall behind her gently.